It's always terrifying when you see a blaze like that, because watching it over the course of the weekend, the whole building appeared to be alight, and I was watching it sort of fearful that there must be loads of people inside that haven't been able to get out. Thankfully, they were able to get out, but it doesn't bode well, does it, for the sort of construction business, which is supposed to have been addressing this problem?
Well, one would have hoped it's being addressed, but the current rehash of the approved document B, which is the guidance to building regulations, has only really tried sorting things out for buildings above 18 metres. Now, Actually, this one is above 18 metres because it's 7 storeys, and therefore it shouldn't have been built in the way it's been built. It shouldn't have been built this way, less than that, but they can get away with it according to the guidance.
So what about this idea that after Grenfell, we were supposed to have been looking at buildings that had cladding on them which could make a fire accelerate in some way? We were supposed to be removing cladding from buildings which was like the Grenfell-style cladding. Has that been done?
Very little of it's been done. It's only being looked at of buildings over 18 metres, which this one falls into. But it's not been done properly. Now, with the marvels of Google Street View, I was able to have a look at the construction of this building back in 2015. Steel frame with steel stud work to fill in the gaps between the large frame. Into that, they put polyisocyanurate insulation. That's the stuff that was similar to the stuff that was on Grenfell.
Okay.
But this was a roofing grade, and you have a classification of A to E, with E is the worst in regards to fire.
Right.
This stuff with Class E. Over that, you have got a plywood sheet, which is Class D. On top of that, you've got a breather felt, which is Class E.
Hey.
On top of that, you've got timbers 50 by 100, which is Class D. And on top of that, you had high-pressure laminate, which, if you're lucky, it's Class C, but most of it is Class D. So basically, everything in that wall, apart from the plasterboard inside and then the steel frame, everything was combustible.
That seems mad, doesn't it, given what we know now?
It's mad, given what we knew then.
Well, yes. But now unforgivable, perhaps, then, is the word I should use.
Oh, it's been unforgivable for years. You know, even in the 2019 revision, we can clad up to 18 metres with timber 9 millimetres thick on the outside of a building. That is sheer lunacy, and it's coming from the advisors to government who should be making changes but don't seem to be able to, and I don't know why. We don't know what they've been telling the ministers. We don't know what Brian Martin or people from the Building Research Establishment or the like told Eric Pickles after the Order 43 letter, where the judge in the Lacanal fire, where we had 9 deaths, said that the building approved guidance to the building regulations was not fit for purpose. He did nothing. Why didn't Eric Pickles do anything? What was the advice he was given? What is the advice that is being given after Grenfell by the likes of Dr. Debbie Smith of the Building Research Establishment, Martin Shipp, Brian Martin, and a number of other people? What advice are they giving? We don't know. And I think that this ought to be made a matter of public record so we can see what the advisors have been telling the ministers, because the advisors knew, or they ought reasonably to have known, of the problems with these modern methods of construction. And if they didn't know the problems with the modern methods of construction, then they're not fit to be advisors because they can't advise.
Well, quite, or at least they're not willing to advise in such a way that their advice should be taken up, because at the moment it would appear that the building regulations have not been changed, which they were supposed to have been. It would appear that local authorities have not got the money to remove all of the cladding and replace it with something else. It would appear that the owners of the buildings and the constructors of the buildings would rather pass the amount of money on to the tenants of the buildings, who clearly don't have the money. I mean, the whole thing is an absolute and utter mess, isn't it?
It's an utter mess. Warnings were given, I gave warnings about this in 2014. I warned about ACM. I warned about timber cladding. I warned about timber balconies. I warned about car parks underneath buildings. This building had a car park underneath it. You've got four-wheel and two-wheel petrol bombs underneath.
Right.
And nothing is being done. Now, one of the high-ranking civil servants, off the record, when other people weren't listening, would always say, oh, yes, but the number of people dying in fires is falling. Show me the bodies.
Yeah.
And that was this person's attitude.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you and I both know, Arnold, that there are people in this world, in the corporate world in particular, who will be more than happy to show you a Venn diagram of how death doesn't happen very often, so the risk involved in not dealing with the amount of money that would stop those deaths is actually worth carrying out.
Yeah, we're back to the old Ford Pinto, if you ever know about that, where it was cheaper not to make the modifications and then pay out for when the people died in car crashes.
Yeah. Which is a shocking thing to still be doing, isn't it?
It is a shocking thing. It is shocking all the way through. And, you know, I can't hold a minister responsible unless I know that he was given advice that things needed to be changed, and he didn't make the changes. Now, a minister hadn't a clue about building or putting things together. You know, my local MP, well, he was a taxi driver. Well, he could have had the job in the TCLG and now the MHCLG. What does he know about building regulations? So it all goes back to who you surround yourself with in regards to your advisors. And to be honest, I think they should replace these advisors on whose watch these multiple fires have happened and replace them with the people who, free of charge, have been warning about it.
Well, up in the north-west of England, Matt Rack, General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union, says this is not how any building should react to a fire in the 21st century, let alone a building in which people live. It's time for a complete overhaul of UK fire safety before it's too late. Now, can the Fire Brigades Union not effect some kind of change?
The Fire Brigade Union can scream as much as they like, but until government makes changes and those advising them start making the right changes, you know, you can shout as much as you like. You know, you go back to the story of Noah's Ark. What does Noah's Ark teach you? Noah's Ark teaches you that you can tell people there's disaster coming. You have enough time to cut down all the trees, make an ark, then go into the whole world, then fill the boat with food and 2 of every animal. And it's only when the door closes, everyone says, bloody hell, he was right.
Yeah, but he's the only one with an ark, though. What are
he
you meant
was the
to
only
do?
one with the ark because he was the only one who was sensible.
Oh, I see.
But everybody else ignored him. People ignore the people who give these warnings until the disaster has struck to such an extent that you can't possibly do anything but listen to what has been said, and then it's normally too late.
Yeah.
We've got tens of thousands of buildings which are probably hundreds of thousands which are dangerous, and we're building more.
Well, the problem here as well, Arnold, is what I don't want to have to be doing is talking to you in a few months' time saying, do you remember when we talked about that building in Bolton and still nothing happened? Because this is one that got away. Nobody died in this one, and people were very fortunate, thankfully. But that might not always be the case. I mean, how many buildings do you think in this country, just in England alone, need to have their cladding removed?
Countless.
Well, countless, like what, dozens, hundreds, what?
Hundreds of thousands. You know, it could be 100,000 or more. You know,
100,000 buildings
or more. You go into estates. We had a fire in Worcester Park in a timber frame property a month or so back.
Yeah.
Oh, everything's wrong with that building. That's a whole estate which has got problems. The builders, Berkeley Homes, Berkeley St James, had fires in another identical New Hampshire design down in Kent. What have they done about it? Nothing. They've had 3 fires down in Kent on the site. The warnings have been given. The fire brigade have written their reports. They said what needs to be done. Nothing has been done. And you take that, there are hundreds of people, probably, you know, thousands of properties, and you add them one on top of the other, on top of the other. We have a tremendous problem because the people who should have been listening, who should have been advising, didn't do their job.
I'm slightly disturbed by the sheer size of this cock-up, if I may use that term.
Absolutely. I don't normally ring. I mean, it's the first time I've ever rung a radio show.
Well, welcome. Thank you for doing it.
I do listen to you quite a lot. Yeah, but I live where I live in a housing association place, and this building, the car park was condemned recently because of fire inspection. The buildings opposite me, which are 21 stories high, they believe that their cladding is aluminium, and they have to change all that. And it's just the tip of an iceberg. I think they've identified about 7 or 8 properties in Reading recently. So I agree with your last caller. It's a massive thing, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, after Grenfell happened, how can it still be now more than 2 years on and none of this has changed? It's incredible.
Absolutely. And the only reason now they found out that cladding was...
How?
Well, someone tried to remortgage their flat, and the surveyor said, "Oh, actually," when they'd done the survey, they said, "Actually, the cladding's you can't remortgage it because the cladding's done." So they had to get the fire service in, and
they had to redo it. So it's again a financial decision rather than a safety decision, right?
And I believe the original builders are having to foot the cost, and they reckon it's going to take up to 3 years to do the whole building.
Yeah, because I mean, the last time I spoke about this, Andy, I got the very clear impression that nobody was willing to take on the cost. Like the builders don't want to do it, the local authority doesn't want to do it, the tenants, generally speaking, can't afford it, and the government won't give anyone the money.
Oh, absolutely, because we've got the car park downstairs, and it's been cleared out for a month. They said it would take a week to do the work. That was a month ago, and they've got the scaffolding up, and they're clearly not telling us exactly what's going on. Ironically, we have a residents' meeting this evening. So
okay. Well, I'd be interested to know what comes out of it. Do keep in touch, Andy. What about the fire kind of escape plans, the fire evacuation plans? Are you confident about those?
Well, absolutely, because the only reason we can stay here, apparently, is because they've had to put 24-hour fire wardens, so they patrol the building. They're downstairs, and then they patrol the building. But I believe that my particular housing association had a similar property in London this year, which they had to evacuate everyone from, and they had to pay everyone, I think they paid them £7,000, and they had to relocate them, and there's no guarantee that they can move back into that property, apparently. So.
Goodness me. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I used to work for Berkeley Homes. Seems it's been rather given a bit of a poor deal, I think, by the caller a few minutes ago.
Well, he's not a caller. He's a chartered surveyor and member of the Association of Specialist Fire Protection.
Indeed. But we all have different views. And he was going on about wood and this being, flammable. Everyone knows that wood's flammable and things like that. They're different grades, and it's how they're put together in a different way that makes the fire system appropriate. And all these types of things are put together by local government for you to follow. So you cannot put up a building unless the local government authority has given you the permission to do so. And for them to do that, it has to go to their planning regs. They have to go to their fire regs.
Right.
So ultimately, it's them that make the decision on the fire regs and the planning. Now, when I've worked for Langer Rourke, and I've worked for Berkeley's, and I've worked for Galliford Try, I've worked for the big construction companies. Yeah. And whenever this falls at their doorstep, they get on it straight away. They don't want a bad name. They don't want to be building properties like that, And these people come on and start slagging them off and things. I think it's wrong. I don't know any laws for them. I was with them a year ago. I worked with them for 5 years, and as soon as you got any heat of something like this, I used to get a phone call from my director, and I used to have to drop everything and go down and sort it out.
And when you say you've got a call about anything like this, meaning what exactly?
Yeah. A failing in construction. I used to deal with the defects in construction.
Okay. So what would, for example, what would a construction boss, for example, would call you to say there's been a failure of construction? How would that occur?
Well, what would possibly happen is that, say, a gas engineer has gone in and looked at installation of boiler and found out there's a bit of fireproofing missing between two buildings or something like that has been missed, or there's only an inch gap, or a small bit of sealant has been missed around a bit of boarding, and that would count as something that needs to be dealt with straight away. Yeah. Because obviously, we don't want to be found liable for things like that.
Well, no, of course.
So,
but you know as well as I do, Simon, look, I totally take your point that the council regulations are inadequate, because I think we all know that they are inadequate, but also construction companies are commercial organisations, and they will do things cheaply if they can, only because that makes business sense. You know, all I'm saying,
Yeah,
I'm not,
that's
you know,
fine, yeah.
I'm not pointing at any one particular company. That happened to be a company that was mentioned by Arnold Tarling, but I'm sure there are other companies. But what we do know is that there are homes and buildings in this country which are inflammable and which are at risk of going on fire, which should have been dealt with after Grenfell and haven't been.
There are, but I believe that's in the power of the councils. I don't believe it's in the... Because what happens is you get stuck in this daydream sort of land where no one wants to do anything because obviously it counts as their liability as soon as they touch it again.
Yeah, but
So
we're talking about people's lives, Simon. It's all very well sitting there saying, you know, it's not fair to blame the construction company. If a construction company has built a building which is at risk of going on fire, right, then it hasn't been built properly.
No. Well, it has, according to plans and regulations and according to...
Don't give me all that baloney. Do not give me that baloney, Simon. There are 70-odd people dead in Grenfell, OK? They were not going to be convinced by either you or the construction company that everything was done right, because it wasn't. Otherwise, it'd still be alive.
No, it obviously wasn't done correctly.
But it was done according to the rules.
The experts advised.
It was done according to the rules. Well, what are you doing working in a building site, a building company, putting up buildings that you know that can happen to?
You don't know that can happen because this only came to light afterwards, as I say. So it's you're giving advice on that. If you go to experts and they give you advice and they tell you this is what's going to happen, that's what's going to happen, and you're given a green stamp to build it, you go ahead and build it because you are not an expert in every single field. You go to these people.
So you don't say, are you sure that if we didn't spend more money on this, actually it might be safer?
Yeah, I'm sure they would say that.
Would they?
And maybe that's so. You know, obviously it comes down to bottom line when you're dealing with big firms.
No, it doesn't. It comes down to human. Actually, it comes down to human lives. Actually, Simon, it doesn't come down to bottom line, and that's what's wrong with the system. But listen, I appreciate your call, but I think you're defending the wrong people here. There is a problem. It's not just the fault of the construction companies, but the construction companies are also to blame. It's as simple as that. You want to talk about cladding?
Yeah. People always say to us, "What are the downsides of being in the EU?" Or what have we gained from it? You know, when we joined, and you're part of the single market, you have to have a harmonisation of standards. Not all the countries, when you join a club, you've all got a different building standard. Do you remember the old kite marks?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the standard that applied on cladding before was a superior standard that we had.
Yeah.
And it actually related to the way the cladding was tested. The cladding was actually tested in situ. This cladding, as I understand it, they put a flammable material, these new claddings, I'm talking about Grenfell, in between two panels that were fireproof, blah, blah, blah. My argument would always be just don't have any flammable material in the building.
Well, exactly. But they now seem, as Arnold told us, we seem to have a grading of flammable materials, right?
Right. And we all know that what is actually happening is that you've got big corporations, big builders, through their trade bodies, can lobby a central regulatory authority, in this case the EU, to allow cheaper materials or materials that are flammable to become legal. And at the end of the day, with the best will in the world, if you're quoting to build a building and you say you want to be an honest contractor and you say, well, we're going to use slightly more expensive materials because it saves lives or it's safer, you're going to lose a contract. And what happens is the costs then when these buildings go up in flames and people die is, apart from the human, emotional and horrible costs that are there, is that the government then has to fork out because it will get sued and whatever. So people, taxpayers, the cost is borne on is on the public sector, and of course the profit's always privatised. And we see that model again and again and again. It doesn't matter what industry you look at, it's the same thing. Yeah. Could I suggest that all contractors, all builders should contribute to an insurance fund, so when these buildings go up, at least people can make a claim against the private companies, and then the government his role would just be to make sure that the tests are being conducted properly. No, I don't think you should have. No, I don't think you should set in a system whereby people can claim against it. What they should have is a system whereby buildings don't get built with materials which are likely to be unsafe, and I think that's a fairly straightforward thing to ask for, isn't it? Yeah. No, Mike. It's the same as in the finance industry. They used to separate the investment banks from commercial and retail and mum and pop banking.
Right.
And then, of course, 10 years after that Glass-Steagall legislation was repealed, we had an international banking crisis that went around the whole world.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. The model repeats itself. All the costs are always on the public sector, taxpayers, and all the profits are privatised. And I'm no socialist, dude. I'm not.
No, listen, I'm with you. I don't like to see regulation where it's not required, but I do like to see regulation where it is required. And when it comes to buildings going on fire, that's where you need regulation. That's where you need to have very, very carefully crafted rules which prevent companies which are out to make money from building buildings which are dangerous. It's not rocket science, is it?
Thank God there are people like you who take their job seriously in the media and have a laugh doing it.